By the way, if you're new, welcome. My name's Isaac. I'm the lead pastor here. Thrilled that you're here. You're at a great place with incredible people. So several years ago, a friend of mine, she really wanted to get married. She was a faithful follower of Christ. She really wanted to have a man in her life, and so she was praying that God would bring her somebody, just a kind woman. She was approaching middle age, and she's saying, she really wanted to find somebody. And so after a while, she did find a man. They got married, and just a few months after they were married, her husband had a stroke and left him completely debilitated. So she had to now, after, I couldn't remember exact amounts. It was like 2 months, 3 months. She now was full-time provider for her family, and she also was full-time caregiver for her husband. And so now she's having to work full-time, try to find somebody to come in and take care of her husband. It was an extremely stressful period of time. And so she was just very difficult. She went from excited bride to full-time caregiver. And it was in just a short period of time. And I just remember thinking, this is not the life that she had planned. This is not what she intended when she's saying, God, I want to be married. I want to have somebody to share my life with. It just didn't go quite like she was thinking. Many of us have our plans for life, and they look different than how they end up living out, right? We go, this isn't quite what I intended. Dr. Seuss, he has this great book. Any Dr. Seuss fans in here? I love Dr. Seuss. He's about my speed. He has a book that's often read at graduations for high school and college. Here's a couple of lines. The book is called Oh, the Places You Will Go. He says this, you're off to great places. Today is your day. Your mountain is waiting, so get on your way. And then another line a little bit later. You have brains in your head. You have feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself any direction you choose. You're on your own, and you know what you know, and you are the one who will decide where to go. We graduate from high school and college, and we're saying, yeah, I get to determine. I'm going to go. It's going to be amazing. We're expecting exhilaration and sunbeams. And then we experience life. And that line that says, and you are the one that decides where to go, we discover that's not always the case. We have great intentions, great plans, and this just didn't work out quite as I expected. We go on these adventures, and there's years of frustration, pain, loneliness maybe. We're experiencing that, and we say, I know God had a plan. I know God told me to go this direction. I know He opened up the way, and yet He couldn't have been thinking this. There's no way this was His plan for me. It's just not what He was, right. Have anyone ever been there? This is our story this morning. Our morning is about a man named Joseph. We're in a series called 9 Wells, and the Bible uses wells. These wells are key locations where people come and they experience life. This one is maybe the most tragic. It's just heartbreaking if you imagine what's going on here. But what we discover is that God knows what He's doing. God knows what He's doing here. So this morning we're looking at Joseph, not Jesus' dad. Not that Joseph, not Mary and Joseph, a different Joseph. He is the just one great. He is the great-grandson of Abraham. His dad is Jacob. He is the 11th of 12 sons. He is way down on the totem pole is where he should be. He happens to be the firstborn son of Jacob's favorite wife, named Rachel. Now, if there's ever a term that's called favorite wife, you know things are going to get really tense in just a little bit. That's not normal. You know there's trouble ahead if you're saying things like favorite wife. So we have to back up just a little bit to kind of catch us up what's going on here. So some of you may know about Joseph and his brothers. Some of you may not. So let me just take just a little bit. Joseph had an incredible life, and that's who we're looking at today. His father, Jacob, also named Israel. He's the person that the nation of Israel is named after. So Jacob gets married, and his first wife is named Leah. Now, Jacob was tricked into marrying Leah. And you think, that's weird. Who gets tricked into marrying somebody? Well, Jacob was. It was a horrible tragedy, just really sad. But that's what happened. We don't have time for that story. Jacob loves Leah's sister, Rachel. He ends up marrying Rachel. And one Bible scholar, this was interesting to me, one Bible scholar said that this is one of the few romantic marriages of the Old Testament. I thought, oh, that's sad. But Jacob loves Rachel, but he's also married to Leah, Rachel's sister. Again, you can already sense the drama building. This is not going to go well. Well, Jacob ends up having children with Leah. Rachel's not able to provide Jacob any children, so Leah has a bunch of them. Pretty soon, Rachel gets jealous, so Rachel gives her servant to Jacob as a wife. She starts bearing kids. Leah then stops having kids, so then she gives her servant. So eventually, Jacob basically has 4 wives, and he has 10 kids, and none of them are Rachel's. And so actually has at least 10 boys. 10 boys and at least 1 girl in the mix here. Finally, Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife, has a son named Joseph. She has one more named Benjamin, and while she's giving birth to Benjamin, Rachel dies. Jacob loves these last 2 boys, Joseph and Benjamin. They become his favorite. So he ends up with 12 boys, at least 1 girl, big family, lots of tragedy, lots going on in this story. And so Joseph becomes Jacob's favorite. And everyone knows it, including the brothers. He should have been the younger brother that everybody picks on, but Jacob has him as his favorite son. And so as Joseph grows older, he has dreams that he will rule over the entire family, including his dad. And big brothers don't like this dream. I'm the oldest. I wouldn't put up with that kind of nonsense in my family. I'm the oldest. I'm in charge. That's how the system works. And so, but Joseph, he started having dreams. So his brothers hated him. And when I say hate, I don't mean they just made fun of him or picked on him. They hated Joseph. But what's interesting here is that Jacob and Joseph were a little bit unaware. They were naive of the situation. They didn't realize the danger that Joseph was in. They just thought they were brothers. So I'm going to read a couple of verses before where Emily read this morning. This is in Genesis 37, 12 through 17. It says this, "Now Joseph's brothers went to pasture their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, 'Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them.' And Joseph answered, 'Here I am.' So Jacob said to him, 'Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me.' So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. So Joseph came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering the fields. The man asked him, 'What are you seeking?' 'I am seeking my brothers.' And he said, 'Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock.' The man said, 'They have gone away, for I heard them say, let's go to Dothan.' So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. So Jacob says, 'Joseph, I want you to go check to see if all is well with your brothers.' He's sending them out. And Joseph, being naive, unaware what he's about to walk into, says, 'Yeah, sure, I'll go. I'll go check on the welfare of my brothers.' Well, here's the word well there. It's actually in English only mentioned once, but in the Hebrew, the word is shalom, and it's mentioned several times. And that word shalom might sound familiar to you if you've been in the church world very long. It's this word that means peace, wholeness, goodness. We're seeking the shalom of Jesus. Oftentimes, the Hebrews will say shalom. It's a greeting. It means wealth or wholeness. It's a good greeting. Shalom is what we're seeking. So Jacob wants to see if his sons, the other 10, are well. Joseph and Jacob don't know they are not well. They have hatred in their heart. So Joseph goes looking for his sons. He thinks everything is fine. But instead, the brothers are filled with anxiety, anger, stress, and Joseph's walking into this. Have any of you walked into a situation where you think all is well? You walk in and you realize, whoa, all is not well. I just walked into something here. That's where Joseph is heading. So he's heading out. He's looking for his brothers. He can't find them. And he's wandering around lost. He doesn't know where to go. Now, it's interesting. There's a man that shows up. Just no beginning, no end. He just kind of shows up. There's some questions about that. And he asks Joseph what he seeks. This is so good. Jesus, one of the first questions he asks his future disciples is, what do you seek? We are people who seek. In fact, there's an author I really like named Trevor Hudson, and he says, our faith is a seeking faith. We're constantly seeking something. And so this man says, Joseph, what are you seeking? And Joseph is seeking his brothers. He's seeking the welfare of his brothers. We are constantly seeking something. And so what are you looking for? Are you looking for peace, for comfort, for ease, for Jesus? What is it that you're looking for? Stability in your home. Maybe you are looking for things to just be at rest. You want things to be well, and you're about ready to walk into a storm and you didn't know it. In fact, you're going to be at the center of the storm and you don't realize what you're about to walk into. This is what Joseph is going to do. And so he thought he was being obedient. What's interesting here is he's being obedient to his dad. And we also know that God has uniquely placed this man to point Joseph in the right direction. So Joseph is being led by God to find his brothers. Isn't that interesting? God is in this environment where Joseph is heading towards his destruction, and he doesn't know it, and God is saying, go that way. This is what Joseph is doing. He's being obedient, and sometimes our best decisions lead us into tragedy. Sometimes we go through difficult seasons, but actually what it's doing is it's pointing towards life. This is what God is doing. It looks like it's painful in the moment. Down the road, we will experience God's freedom. We will experience God's grace. We just have to get to the other side. We have to go through heartache and pain. This is the lesson of Joseph this morning. So Joseph tells this man that he's on his way to Dothan. And this person directs Joseph to a place that will eventually bring about the destruction of Joseph's way of life as he knows it. But it will simultaneously bring salvation to the nation of Israel and to Joseph's entire family. It looks horrific, and yet there is hope here. God is in the middle of this whole tragic event. God is making a way. He's bringing about salvation when it's going to look very bleak for Joseph. The tragedy here that's about to occur does not catch God unaware. So if you're going through heartache, pain, difficulty, God's not up there going, I didn't expect those people to do that. Now what? I didn't expect those people to treat this person horribly. Oh, boy. What we learn from Joseph is in the midst of tragedy, God still has a way out, has salvation, has our best intentions in mind. God is going to make a way. So, number one, life doesn't always go as planned. Dr. Seuss's line, and you are the one who will decide where to go, isn't always accurate. The brothers are in Dothan. Joseph shows up, and for our sake, the word Dothan means two wells. Again, we're in a series called Nine Wells. Well, Dothan has two wells. Joseph's about ready to be thrown into one of them. So he heads towards Dothan. Emily read what transpired here. The brothers see Joseph walking a ways off. It's likely he had the special coat that his dad had given him because he's the favorite son. He's the one who will carry the family name. So he's given this coat. The brothers see it way off in the horizon, and they have a plan. When Joseph gets to them, they grab him, they seize him, they strip him of his clothes, they take his coat, and they throw him into this pit. It says pit, but really what it's saying, it's an empty well. Where there was once water, now they've thrown Joseph. And here he is in this empty well. There's just imagine the scene. He's grabbed by his brothers. The ones who are supposed to care for him, nurture him, take care of him, look out for him, they're the ones who are abusing him and bringing this problem to him. Now, we all have siblings for the most part. Number one rule when you're the older kids and you have younger siblings, number one rule is, what does mom always say when you walk out the door? Take care of Adley. That's what's always said. Make sure your brother is taken care of. The oldest is always looking out for the youngest. Does everybody else have that rule? That's what you do. Why? Because we're family. The older ones look out for the younger ones. What did these older brothers do? They did the worst thing you could do. They grabbed their youngest, who they're supposed to look out for, and they threw him in a pit. This is terrible. They strip him of his clothes. The great 20th century Spanish artist Salvador Dali, he sketched out this moment. I thought it was interesting. I hope we have it here. So this is his image of what's going on. That's Joseph being lowered into the well. The image, though, was kind of Joseph just kind of, just dealing with it, laying back like, oh, I'm going into the well. I just don't imagine that, the actual work of it. I'm thinking they had to push him. If you're there, you know how siblings fight. I'm imagining blows. This had to be an ordeal to get him in the well. In fact, Genesis later on depicts, years later, the scene. The brothers are standing before Joseph. They don't know it's Joseph in Egypt. And this is how they describe the scene, Genesis 42:21. They said to one another, "Alas, we are paying the penalty for what we did to our brother. We saw his anguish when he pleaded with us, but we would not listen. That is why anguish has come upon us." So Joseph is in the well. He's begging them to let him free. He's saying, let me out. He wants out. And his brothers do not allow him. He's at the bottom of this well crying for help. Some of us have been to the bottom of the well before. We're saying, I did not want to be down here. I was forced down here by people that it's outside of my control. I'm down here. I'm frustrated. I'm angry. I'm hurt. People that I cared about put me down here. This is not right. You're begging God for help. Some of us have been down there. I think of some families, the pain husbands and wives, parents and kids have done. The people who are supposed to stand up for one another, nurture, love, care about, and instead there's affairs, there's lies, there's abuse. It's terrible. Or I think of the countless people by this point, of people who have no longer attend church, just any church in America, because the place where we should be full of grace and joy and reception and hospitality and kindness, instead when people walk in the door, they're met with judgment, criticism, condemnation, gossip. And so they no longer come back because we as the church should have been kind. We weren't. We should have taken them in. Many of us feel like we've been to the bottom of that well, crying out for help, but we've been ignored. But catch this, we are not ignored. Joseph was left for dead in that well. They were planning on just leaving him in there and letting him starve. That's what the big plan was. Joseph cries out, and what happens? A caravan of travelers come by. And Joseph was unwittingly saved through this process. Judah, he gets the bright idea, what if we sold Joseph and actually made some money off this guy? So the brothers conspire to sell their brother. Just horrific. But it saves Joseph's life. God was in the midst of this. God did not leave Joseph in the bottom of that well. He rescued him out. So they pulled Joseph out, and Joseph is sent on his way. The brothers intended him to be left for dead. But God brought somebody along. See, Joseph now Joseph's world is completely different. He was the favorite son. That is now a thing of the past. He is instantly thrown into a life he'd never hoped for or wanted. Some of our lives have been upended like that. There's things that happen, you go, this is not the direction I thought this was going. This is not the life we thought. Where can God be in the midst of this? We sing a song often around here called "See a Victory." There's a line in it that says, what the enemy meant for evil, God will use for good. That line comes from this exact story. What God meant for evil, or what our enemy meant for evil, God will use for good. And Joseph, he ended up in Egypt, a slave, sold again into slavery to another person. This time he's sold and he's purchased by a high-ranking officer in Pharaoh's court. And as a servant, Joseph quickly rose in the ranks, and eventually he runs the household. Then the master's wife, Potiphar's wife, starts to notice Joseph and think, this guy is handsome. She takes a liking to him, so she tries to take advantage of him, and once again, Joseph says no, so Joseph takes off out of the room, but Potiphar's wife grabs his cloak, and Joseph runs away naked. I think it's fascinating that Joseph shows up at a place clothed and blessed and leaves naked. This keeps happening to him. And so he's running for his life. He ends up being thrown into prison. And while he's in prison, he becomes a leader of the prisoners. The prisoners start to look for him. He becomes the head prisoner, which is an odd thing to say. But look at this. We're told something throughout Joseph's life that's really important for all of us to hear. This is in Genesis 39:3 when he's in Potiphar's house. While he's in slavery, it says this: his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hands. Then in prison, in Genesis 39:21, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. He gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's care all the prisoners who were in the prison, and whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The chief jailer paid no heed to anything that was in Joseph's care because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Joseph was the favorite son, and God was with him. He was a slave, and God was with him. He was in prison, and God was with him. Notice the trajectory of Joseph's life. Son, slave, prisoner. That is not the trajectory we want to be going. That's not the goal of our life, is to go son, slave, prisoner. And yet, God was with him. God never abandoned him. This didn't look like the life Joseph had imagined. And yet, God was there. He didn't expect to be thrown into an empty well. God was there. He didn't plan on being a slave. God was there. He didn't plan on having a prison ministry. And God was there. See, many of us we have a different path, but it still looks like, I want to go this direction, God. I want to go up and to the right, and instead I keep going further and further down. Life is getting harder. What is going on, God? We can be reminded as we look at Joseph's life that God is there. He is with us. He hasn't left us. We can trust that God is there. Joseph shows us success through struggle. Success through struggle. Now, what does that doesn't sound fun. Despite the pain, frustration, and shame, we see that God's always by his side. And so Joseph, he had an interesting path. 22 years from the time he was sold by his brothers until he sees them again. It's a really important part to realize that Joseph will see his brothers again. So he had 13 years in slavery and in prison. Then he had 7 years where he runs Pharaoh's the land, 2 years of famine, and then eventually his brothers show up. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of turmoil. There's a lot of frustration, anger. And in the midst of this, God still, at the end, keeps his promises. So what happened was back in Israel, while Joseph was gone for 20 years, they're just doing their thing. They're pretending, acting like he's dead. They tell Joseph's dad, Jacob, that he's dead. The family's doing their thing. But then a famine comes in. 20 years after Joseph was gone, a famine hits. So 2 years into the famine, we catch up with the story. This is what Jacob tells his kids. This is Genesis 42, 1 through 3. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you keep looking at one another? I have heard," he said, "that there is grain in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. Now Joseph was governor of the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he said. They said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." Although Joseph had recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Can you imagine this moment? 22 years later, after Joseph was sold by his brothers, they stand in front of him. They're bowing down just like in Joseph's dream. And he's sitting there. And he realizes that God had sent him to Egypt through the hands of his brothers to rescue the family. Now, he has some questions. All is not well yet. He has some questions. And so what he ends up doing is he keeps one of the brothers and he sends them back with grain. And then they wait. After several years, they return and come back to get more food. It's Joseph the one that they have to get the food from. So, his time in the well, slavery, prison, Pharaoh's right-hand man, all so that at the right time, God could fulfill his promise to the people of Abraham. So that God would bring them out and save them from the famine, bring them to the nation of Egypt. So we see here that God's presence and purpose can be found. In the midst of our tragedy, in the midst of our pain, God's presence and purpose can be found. One pastor named John Piper, he said this: God brings his people into life-threatening peril, all the while preparing in that very peril their God-glorifying deliverance. Some of us are walking through some of that peril, and God is doing that so that in the end you will find God's deliverance. You will see his purpose. You will see his presence. Your life didn't go as you expected, and yet in the middle of that you go, oh, here's what God is doing. I didn't expect this. We wouldn't have chosen this. And yet in the end, God provides. God is able to use the hurt, the pain, whatever you've experienced, the thing that you're walking through right now, the thing that's causing you confusion and pain, God can use that for his God-glorifying deliverance. Joseph even acknowledged this in Genesis 45, 7 through 8. Joseph said this: God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep you alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt. See, God had his hand on Joseph the whole time. God is able to use these painful moments in our lives to point us towards his goodness. He's able to use the difficult times in our life for us to see that God is providing and making a way. In fact, it was after Jacob died. So imagine all the family reunites in Egypt. Joseph reveals who he is. Everybody says, I can't believe you're still alive. Incredible reunion. Great story. But then their dad dies. You can imagine the brothers thinking, okay, Dad's not here to protect us. He's in charge of all of Egypt. What's he going to do to us? What is Joseph going to do? And this is what Joseph says to them to ease their fear. In Genesis 50, verse 20. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. And there's that verse. What our enemy meant for evil, God will use for good. Our enemy has evil intentions. He wants to see us destroyed, divided, discouraged, defeated, dead. God brings us goodness, joy, peace, love, acceptance. This is what God brings. And so Satan's trying to tear us down, and God has another plan. He will use the enemy's schemes and point it toward good. Two brilliant scholars, Alan Ross and John Oswald, they said this: though Joseph was righteous, he was not kept from suffering. And to that, can I just go, oh man, that's a bummer, isn't it? He was instead preserved by his faith through the suffering. And in the end, he could acknowledge that God had intended it for good. Wisdom literature in the Bible assures the faithful that God brings good out of evil and joy out of pain. If not in this life, certainly in the life to come. It teaches that though the wicked may prosper for a time, the righteous are to hold fast to their integrity, because there is a higher, more enduring principle of life that comes with obedience to God. Since the Lord is sovereign over all life, one cannot hope to fulfill his God-given destiny by disobeying him. At times, God's ways seem unfair, but if endured to the end, they bring greater blessings to the righteous. We will experience hardships. We will experience pain and difficulties, but God uses those moments. He reveals his goodness. What the enemy meant to destroy us, God says, oh, no, I'm going to make this beautiful for you. I'm going to redeem it. I'm going to make a way. Jesus told us that we'd have trouble in this world, but that he has overcome it and that we're going to find peace. Jesus says this in John 16:33. I have said these things to you so that you may have peace. There's that word shalom, that you may have wholeness, goodness. In the world, you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Some of us need to hear that this morning. You're having tribulations and persecutions and problems and pain, and God says, don't worry, I've got it under control. I've overcome the world. I'll take care of this. like these moments. I would not choose pain. I don't like pain. There's a whole bunch of things I do not do because I don't like it. But Jesus uses those times where we have it for his good. I'm reminded of a friend. He was in addiction, alcohol, just going through it. His life was a mess. And not that long ago, he found Jesus. He went to a Bible class called Discover Ministry School at the church here. And he started going through Discover. And he started realizing that God was changing him. So he's now leading the Celebrate Recovery. He's about to, in just a few weeks, he'll get his pastoral license. Here's a man who found addiction. He's becoming a pastor. He's teaching and pastoring the Celebrate Recovery group. He's going to lead a Discover Ministry School campus. His life has changed and transformed, and he wouldn't have thought 3 or 4 years ago, I sure have an addiction problem. I bet God wants me to be a pastor. He wouldn't have thought that. But God uses these things that we go through, these elements of pain, these things that are difficult, and God will bring us out. He'll bring us to salvation. He uses what the enemy meant for evil, and now the thing that caused him the most amount of pain, my friend, is using that to connect with others, to reach people some of us would never be able to reach because he knows what it's like to be in those situations. God is using him. So, maybe your life hasn't gone quite like you planned. You look around going, I don't know. I thought God brought me to Spokane Valley, but it's been kind of a mess since I got here. God has not left you or abandoned you. God will use your current situation to transform you, to bring you life. What I want us to do this week, we always have a practice. And so what I want us to do, if you are in the midst of pain, tragedy, frustration this week, and you start thinking, I don't know, I am getting a little frustrated. What I want us to do is look up and think, God, I think you're here somewhere. Show me where. Begin to turn our hearts to Jesus in the midst of this. It's in our darkest moments that we will find the light that will lead us through it. So that's our practice. When you're frustrated this week, look up. Look up. And here's where I get that idea. There's a prayer that I pray just about every week. It's in a book of prayers called Valley of Vision. I mentioned it before. It's my favorite prayer in this book. The prayer is actually called Valley of Vision. If you want to look it up, you can later. But it's called Valley of Vision. This is the prayer, and I pray it regularly for a number of reasons, but you'll catch towards the end here what it says. So this is a prayer. Lord, high and holy, meek and lowly, you have brought me to the valley of vision, where I live in the depths but see you in the heights. Hemmed in by mountains of sin, I behold your glory. Let me learn by paradox that the way down is the way up, that to be low is to be high, that the broken heart is the healed heart, that the contrite spirit is the rejoicing spirit, that the repenting soul is the victorious soul, that to have nothing is to possess all, that to bear the cross is to wear the crown, that to give is to receive, that the valley is the place of vision. Lord, in the daytime, stars can be seen from the deepest wells, and the deeper the wells, the brighter your stars shine. Let me find your light in my darkness, your life in my death, your joy in my sorrow, your grace in my sin, your riches in my poverty, your glory in my valley. Amen. Lord, in the daytime, stars can be seen from the deepest wells, and the deeper the wells, the brighter your stars shine. Let me find your light in my darkness. Some of us need to hear that this morning. You're in the middle of a deep well. And that's why I say when you're feeling that way, look up, because God's stars shine the brightest. We're in the deepest wells. We see that in Joseph. We see that, he's the bottom of this empty well. He's looking up, and God grabs him from that place and sends him to Egypt. And it looks bad for a long time, but in the end, God brought salvation to the family of Israel. And I don't know what your deep well is this morning, but I know that Jesus is in that well with you. He's not left you. He's there with you. We may not know what he's doing. We may not even like it. Nowhere in this prayer does it say, God, help me like all this. But we still pray and ask God to walk us through that process. He will use what we're going through to lead us to him. Look for him. He is there. In the midst of your darkest situation, he is there. We find him in this process, and he gives us life, and he gives us salvation. He gives us freedom. It is through this well that Joseph actually leads his family to salvation and freedom, because otherwise they would have starved to death. God brought them life through this. Some of us are going through very difficult seasons, and on the other side of it, you will find life and freedom. There's just no shortcut through it, though. You have to go through it to find Jesus. He's there. Let's pray. Jesus, I know that in here, watching online, are people who are going through really difficult seasons. God, I'm grateful that you are there. They may feel abandoned and alone, but they are not. You are with us. And Jesus, I just ask that we would sense your strength, we would sense your grace and your love. Lord, through the pain that you would begin to heal, you'd give discernment and direction to those who need it. Lord, we know that you are helping us be shaped and transformed into people who can find joy and salvation in the midst of all these things. God, we ask for your goodness here. Bring healing, bring restoration. For those that don't yet know you that might be here, we ask that they would say yes to you and invite you into their life. They would submit to you and that they would find the life and goodness that you have promised us. Thank you, Lord, in your name. Amen. So we have two discussion questions we'd like to end with. Number one, how have you responded when you experience unexpected setbacks in your life? See, here's what I assumed by this question, that you've experienced unexpected setbacks. I just am assuming all of us have had something go, well, that didn't go like I thought. What have you done? What have you done when you experienced that? How did you respond? Did you have people come in and help you? What was that like? Talk about those moments. And number two, what can you do this week to help someone going through a difficult season? I'm certain that all of us have people in our life who are going through an unexpected setback right now. How can we come alongside them and point them towards Jesus? That's what we're called to do. Be the hands and feet of Jesus, to pour out God's love through us to them. How can you help someone going through that difficult season? Just so you know, it is a beautiful day out there. It's wonderful. Let me give us a prayer of blessing and we can go. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Intersection, you are loved. Go in peace. Have a great Sunday afternoon.